Hi, and welcome to or welcome back to the Meta Podcast, where we explore performance and how people get better every day in work, sport, and life. And I am super excited to be joined by Dr. Debra Clary. She's the author of a book called The Curiosity Curve, which is a leader's guide to growth and transformation through bold questions. Debra is a former Fortune 50 executive working at places like Frito-Lay, Coca-Cola, Jack Daniels, and Humana, where we met. And so it's great to reconnect. And I'm excited really to dig into the Curiosity Curve, the book, as well as the research that developed what she has coined the Curiosity Curve, which is a research-backed framework that measures how leaders and really individuals think, decide, and adapt. So we're going to get real curious today. So welcome, Debra, to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
What else would you fill in about yourself? And then we'll dive right into the book.
I think one of the things that's very unique about me is that right out of business school, my first job was driving a route truck for Frito-Lay. I was a Teamster. So when people say they start at the bottom, and I was right there, a Teamster, and drove a truck for 9 months, really understanding the business from the ground up. And Frito-Lay started everybody on the truck. And even though I didn't want to do it, I'm like, I'm going to go do this. And I'm glad I did, because that truck became my classroom in terms of how to run a business.
That's amazing. As I was started reading the book, it was one of those things I always know that how good a book is, how many times I'm underlining and taking notes in the margins.
Thank you.
So there's a lot of stuff we want to dig into, but maybe we start with, where did the Curiosity Curve start? Like, what was the genesis of the idea that led you to the book and the research?
Yeah, so it started with a question, a joke, and a puzzle. And the first was a question. So I was sitting in the boardroom with the CEO of Humana, and somebody was presenting at the front of the room, and he leaned over and quietly asked me, "Hey, do you think curiosity can be learned, or is it innate?" I've never thought about that, but now I'm interested in discovering this. And so I said, I'm going to do some research and I'll let you know. Well, I was just leaving for a trip to Rome, and I was on a train from Rome to Florence, and I was sitting next to this very handsome Italian man. And he says to me, "Are you American?" And I'm like, "Well, yes, I am." And he says, "I have the best joke. What do you get when you ask an American a question? An answer." And he thought it was so funny, but I didn't get it, but I was gracious and I nodded my head. Well, while I was in Florence, I began to observe conversations of Europeans, and I'm like, they're different from Americans. So I go back to the US, I'm at work, and Gallup had just released their engagement report. And in the history of measuring employee engagement, they've never seen it so low. So now I had a question, a puzzle, and a joke. And I thought maybe the missing piece is curiosity. So I began with this hypothesis of, could there be a direct correlation between a leader's level of curiosity and performance? So I commissioned a group of researchers to go out and study this. And 3 months later, they came back and said, "How'd you know?" And I said, 3 decades of navigating complex systems, with very large Fortune 50 companies, I began to see, wow, I believe curiosity is the missing piece. And so we did further research, and then we did determine that there was a direct correlation between a leader's level of curiosity and actual performance. So most people think curiosity is, oh, that's a fun thing. That's Curious George, or one day I might read this. And the data suggests for sure that it drives performance. And so I set out to do more research. And once I've got it all together, I just felt so called to be out in the world sharing this with people of how do you drive a culture of curiosity, because it does improve performance.
Well, we talk a lot about performance on this podcast, and we've had everything from CEOs to musicians. And so how do you define high performance in your life, and how do you know when you're performing at a high level?
So how I look at it for myself. So as you had said, everybody's an athlete. So for me, it's like I have a point system. That's like I've created my own point system for living a life that's elevated, if you will. And it starts with when I get up in the morning, am I being mindful? Am I praying? Am I journaling? Am I setting the intention for the day? So I get points for that. And then I go right to the gym. So how hard did I work out? What kind of weights did I lift that day? What was my cardio like? And it just kind of goes on from there. It's just like I've set an intention for my life. And then at the end of the day, I say, how'd I do? And I actually, because I'm analytical, I look at the points I got. So that's one of the ways in which I do it. And one of the things I grade myself on was I kind to others? Was I kind to other people? Am I rushing when I'm at the Starbucks? Am I rushing and not making contact? And it's like, no, I'm at a point in my life where kindness matters and being able to connect with other people, whether it be a CEO or the barista. It's like, how am I showing up with others? So that's how I measure it for myself, but I'm in a very different state in my life in terms of I worked for those big corporations and now I work for myself and I have a clear vision of how do I want to show up every day. So the question I ask people in my life is, what's it like to be with me? What's it like to be with me? So you can ask yourself that as a leader. If you had a team you were leading, what is it like to be with me? Because what you're hoping people are saying is, I feel like you care about me, that you're asking me questions, that my opinion matters, that people want to be seen, heard, and valued. And those are the kind of questions that we can ask our spouse, our children, or the people that we work with. As I think about corporations, every organization, every corporation have goals and objectives, whether that you're a school system, you're a nonprofit, or you are a corporation driving for that performance. And how I look at it is one of what are the results the organization is getting. And then when you see the results, you start backing up into what are the behaviors that drove those results. And even if you're getting fantastic results, is it the kind of culture that can sustain it? Is it the kind of behaviors that we're proud to have?
So I love that answer, because especially the part about how do you feel in my presence? Because there's that famous saying about people won't remember what you say, but they'll remember how you made them feel. And in that, in reading your book, when leaders are curious, what you're telling us is that it creates this environment where people feel heard, they feel supported. And so how can individuals, leaders, maybe even organizations infuse more curiosity to drive higher performance?
Yes. So the in the beginning, everything revolves around us, right? It's your own intention and your own mindset. So for me, it's about when I work with leaders, I say it has to start with you as an individual, not your teams. It has to start with you in terms of, is your intention to create an environment where people are thriving, where people feel seen, heard, and valued? So it's one about, all right, I have to have the right mindset when I'm going into conversations of, I'm not about efficiency in this moment. I'm really about exploring and expanding thinking. So it starts with that individual. Now, when we go into tactics, what I encourage leaders to do with their teams is to make sure you leave space on the agenda for questions. On the agenda, it says discussion time, and that means where people can have a conversation. It's also about when you're presenting something to your team, and it might be direction, it might be the business plan, is to begin to say, what is not clear, or what am I missing, or what are we missing? So it's creating an environment where people know, wow, they really want my opinion. My opinion matters. And that how you respond to someone's question signals how you are as a leader, right? So even if we say, well, we're going to leave space open, and when somebody asks a question, either we ignore it, or we say, that's not going to work, you're right back where you were. You have to have the intention of, I'm expanding the thinking. And when I expand the thinking, we're expanding our performance.
What's interesting, one of the things I found, it would be easy to read the book and go, well, the answer is we just need to ask more questions. But you make the case that there's an optimal level that I think you call the curiosity set point.
Yes.
And how do you start? How do people strike that balance for finding the right curiosity set point? And what are the pros and cons of either side? Too much or not enough?
Yes, yes. So let me talk about too much in the sense. So when I was at Coca-Cola, I was in this chief of staff role, and it was like a developmental role and very like prestigious. I was so excited to get into this role, and I worked for someone by the name of Tom, who was the president of the Coca-Cola company. And I would go in every Monday, and he would be sharing ideas about what he thinks might be really beneficial to do for the division. And I took that as I have to go implement this. I was taking notes, and then I would go out and I would do the research. I would talk to people. I would come back the next week, going to share with him the ideas I have for implementation. And he'd go, "Oh no." And then he would go on another path for something else. And this went on for 2 or 3 weeks. And I thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to get fired because I'm not delivering anything. So I called the former chief of staff and I said, "Man, here's what's going on. I'm really messing up here. Tell me what's happening." And he goes, "Oh my gosh, I forgot to tell you. If only take action if Tom asks for something a third time." So what I learned was Tom was exploring and he was out, he was ideating. I took that as in my mind of I have to go implement this, right? Not that Tom wasn't successful, but I didn't understand that he was in the explore mode and that when his thinking got refined, then that's when we would start taking action on that. So if you think about just in general or in organizations, right? If you spent your whole day wandering and asking questions and not taking any action, you're not going to get results. On the flip side of that is when we're just driving towards those results, we're missing opportunities. And so that's when I talk about there's a balance, there's a set point in terms of making sure you're leaving space for that expanding thinking. And then what are the actions we're going to take? What are we agreeing to do? What are we in alignment that we're going to go take action on? And that's when you get the results.
Which do you find most organizations or even leaders, do they tend to fall on the too curious or the not curious enough side of that balance?
Yes. Yes. So not curious enough. So after the book was published, and it took a while, you know how that goes. You collect your data, you write the
Hmm.
manuscript, and then it gets out into the world. Well, we didn't stop collecting data. So we have over 1,000 executives in our database that have taken the curiosity assessment. And the curiosity assessment is made up of 4 factors that drive curiosity. And what we have gone back and looked at recently is of those executives, we find that as they experience grows, I mean, their expertise grows, their confidence grows, that curiosity narrows. So as certainty rises, curiosity narrows. And the reason is because our brains are wired to move fast. It's called fast pass matching, and that's for our survival. So we know that about our brain. And it also, we get dopamine hits every time we get something done, right? We make a decision, we get a dopamine hit. You don't necessarily get a dopamine hit when you're like interrogating something in terms of how could we be doing this differently. And so it's not our fault that we're not curious. We have been taught to be incurious and our brain supports that. And so the reason for the Curiosity Curve book is to help leaders understand, one, we've done you a disservice because we've taught that leaders have to have all the answers. The
Hmm.
best leaders have all the answers. And that's just not true. Best leaders have the best questions and are inclusive of other people's point of view.
That's interesting because I think back to my own career and that first step into a big role, at this point when I got promoted to be director and the panic I would have, like I need to know all the answers. And it took me a few years to realize like, no, I've hired smart people. They know what they're doing. They're closer to the work. I don't need to know the answer. I just need to create that environment to allow them to get to the answers and support them. I'd love to dig in because you've referenced the 4 factors, and I think it'd be great just to kind of go down through the 4 and explain what they are, and we'll get into more about the 4 factors. But I'd love for you to outline the 4 factors.
Yeah, absolutely. And I approach curiosity different from other probably scientists or experts. I approach it from a systems perspective, and it's based on the organization, right? So I do my assessments inside organization, although individuals can take it separately. But the 4 factors are exploration, focused engagement, inspirational creativity, and openness to new ideas. Right. And curiosity, similar to engagement, ebbs and flows depending on the environment that you're in and also depending on what's happening inside the organization. So I just recently was in New York with the third largest pharmaceutical company in the world, and they took the assessment, and their highest factor was focused engagement. Now, when you look at what they'd been through the last 3 years where they had to drive to get results, it was right what they needed to do. And now they're
Hmm.
saying, wait, we have to come up with new products, new ideas. I said, all right, let's work on exploration and openness to new ideas. So there's not a good or bad score. The score actually is just reflecting what the organization needs right now.
Well, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about that, but you're right. As business flows, I mean, if you need to get stuff done, you're going to spend more time in that second factor, that focused engagement. Whereas, if you're trying to expand into new business, it's a lot more on the exploration side. I'm curious because as I thought about exploration, there's this whole Buddhist concept, and we're going to get to meditation later, about beginner's mind, and which is essentially approaching things as if you don't know anything. Am I connecting that right in that's
Absolutely. And as I had said earlier, is that the brain is wired to protect us. The brain is wired to save energy. So whenever we introduce complexities or new conversations, the brain is like, "Oh my gosh, just land the plane." Right. And but the Buddha saying about beginning with, a beginner's mind is about you have to intentionally say, I'm releasing everything that I think I know, and I'm going to be totally focused on what Michael has to say right now. I have something to learn, or together we can explore and see what's possible from here. Yeah, a direct connection to the beginner's mind.
Yeah, and in the book you talk about this meditation for unlearning, which I just loved. Because I meditate every day, realizing that we do get fixed as we not only move up in the organization, but as we get older. And maybe you could talk through people this practice of meditation for unlearning and what you mean by unlearning.
Yeah, so it's actually a theory. So I didn't create the theory, but it was an individual out of Harvard, and then it's since been developed from there. But the things that it's not about those that know the most, but those that are willing to unlearn and then relearn. And you think about what we're experiencing with technology and AI right now, it requires a whole new way of thinking and patience to learn how do I adapt to this? How do I leverage it to my well-being or to the advancement of the work that I'm doing? And so unlearning is about consciously saying, I don't know. I don't know everything. I don't know about this. I think I might know something, but I might not. That's how I approach it is get up every day and say, what can I discover today? Either about myself or about other people. And there's not a day that doesn't go by that I discover something new or I make a new connection, but I've primed the pump, so to speak. I'm looking for it every day. Now, when I get stressed or I'm feeling anxious about a deadline or whatever it might be, I can slip right back into that. And I have to pull myself back up and remind myself as who are you being with other people right now? Am I being short, direct? Yeah, you need to pull it back. So it's this whole mindset of I want to unlearn what has served me thus far, but it's not going to serve me in the future. And you talked about Marshall Goldsmith, who said, you know, it's what got you here won't get you there. And that is a mindset every day for me. What got Sunday? What worked? Didn't go work today.
Well, I'm glad you referenced that. Because that questioning what we believe or what our thoughts are is so important. And the Marshall Goldsmith quote was something I talk to my athletes all the time, is those things, that practices we've been carrying and doing got you to this place, but what's it going to take to get you to that next place? And so I guess, and in fact, in the book, you talk about curiosity propels us forward. And so how can people stay curious when they're either faced with difficulty or a challenge, or maybe they've hit some plateau in their career or in their athletic achievements?
Yeah. So the first thing to know is that from a neuroscience perspective, fear and curiosity cannot coexist in the brain. So you cannot have those two thoughts holding in your brain at the same time. So what I share with people is that when you're feeling anxious, ask yourself a question. Or if you're feeling stressed, say, who can help me? And as soon as you do that, the brain begins to, the cortisol actually reduces and said, okay, we're on a path of discovery of how we can fix this. So just know in that moment, ask yourself a question or who can help me with this problem?
Well, that's interesting. It's almost like you're offering your brain this exit. Here's an exit. Here's an off ramp from the anxiety, the fear.
Yes. There's this research that shared that we have about 80,000 thoughts a day. And like 90% of those are the same thoughts we had yesterday. Right. Right. It's some of those are good thoughts. What am I going to eat for lunch? What time do I have to pick up the kids? Those are really good things to remember. But if we let our brain go on autopilot, we're going to keep getting the same thing every day, every day. And it's up to us to challenge the way the mind is working. Our being impeccable with our words and our actions is what drives our mindset.
It's interesting because the quote I always say about set is that it's the story we tell ourselves about ourselves. And often those thoughts and stories are just on an infinite loop. And that's why I found the meditation for unlearning such a potential impactful tool for helping people pull apart what's real and what's not, and to question those things that are just circling around in their brain every day. Because you're right, they do just get on that infinite loop.
We do, but we can control our thoughts 100%. If we become aware of, wait, why do I think that? It's like, it's challenging it. Like, wait, why do I think that? Well, my parents thought that. Well, does it still serve me? Right. Or if you're in a culture, you're in an environment and like, wait, does that work for me? And it's just, you might say, yeah, it does work for me, or it doesn't work, but I'm going to stay for whatever reasons. It's this sense of, well, it's like, know
Hmm.
thyself. And the only way you can know yourself is by asking yourself questions. And it's this, the truth is in the triggers. So when something is bothering us, that's what I do. It's like, why is this bothering me? Why is this
That's a great
bothering me?
question.
I mean, it's somebody like somebody cut me off the other day on the highway, right? And I was mad. And I'm like, why does this bother me? Maybe they're on their way to the hospital or, maybe they're late for work. Whatever it might be, it's like, let it go. Just let it go.
Yeah, sometimes hard, especially on the highway. But
Especially when I started as a Teamster, so I know how to drive.
how does curiosity impact our resilience?
I think that when I've not thought of this before, so I'm going to think and speak at the same time. But when I think about resilience is about recovery, perhaps, and it's about, all right, this has occurred. How do I move on through this? What can I learn from this? So I guess the connection is asking questions, right? So if you're stuck or you've been knocked down or somebody has done something to you that you don't appreciate, it's the sense of asking yourself that question of, all right, how important is this right now? Do I need to address it, or is it just my thing I need to get over? So just, I guess the connection is being curious and then moving on.
Yeah, because the challenge, well, at least what we see on the athletic side, is part of resilience is that repeatability, the ability to go to the well time and time again. And some athletes will continue to be, they start by running 5Ks and they run 10Ks, and they move up to that marathon. And each time it's a bigger jump in, the hard thing gets harder. And I've found, reminding them to be curious in the face of that adversity. Maybe it's at mile 20 of the marathon where, you start to hit that wall, and leaning into asking yourself, well, especially like a first time marathoner. I remember this very I think the longest run I had done in my training for my first marathon was like 18 miles. And I got to 18 and I said, well, I wonder what's going to happen here. I guess we'll just see. But using that curiosity, not only to remind yourself that you've done hard things before, but to start to reduce that stress by questioning, well, let's see what happens here. What do I think is going to happen? How can I prepare myself for the next 8 miles?
Yes. And I'm wondering if the question could be, what's it going to feel like when I cross that finish line?
Absolutely.
That thing.
Absolutely.
Are you familiar with Tim Galway, who wrote,
Yes.
right? So Tim Galway is probably the father of all coaching practices, right? It's starting back in the 70s. And he had played at Harvard. He was the captain of the tennis team at Harvard. So he was an athlete. His major is English literature. So when he graduates, he doesn't have a job. So Tim Galway goes back to California and he starts working at the local club, helping young athletes, men, boys, young men practice their tennis and get better. And what he found was that his tennis players that would visualize hitting the ball versus the one that kept practicing their backhands and trying to get it right. If they could visualize it, then they had a better chance of being successful. And that's how he started his whole coaching practice was, wow, what if corporate executives could visualize
Hmm.
success? What if we could ask questions that advance people's thinking? And at the heart of coaching, as you know, is asking questions.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's questions pull, answers push. And so our job as coaches is really most people have the answers inside them, is my belief. It's just, as a coach, how do we get that out of them so that they can see it, and be asking themselves those questions to pull out the answers that are more often than not inside of them.
Yes. So I have something I do with I have 4 grandchildren and I'll ask them questions and they'll say, I don't know. I don't know. So this happened to me yesterday. 4-year-old grandson, I said, where are your shoes? He said, I don't know. I know he knows where his shoes are. He just doesn't want to put them on. So I say to him, if you did know, what would you know? If you did know, what would you know? And he goes, they'd be by the front door. And I go, let's go check. In the sense of helping them understand, like you probably do know the answer, but for whatever reason, your confidence isn't there or you don't want to do something. And it's just, for me, has been really helpful in terms of helping my grandchildren have the confidence to come up with something, even if it's wrong.
Hmm. Yeah. What you mentioned this earlier, just about technology. And as I thought about that, I don't know whether it falls in exploration or focused engagement in the 4 factors, but what have you seen as the impact of things like social media, the internet in general, the fact that at our fingertips, we can find any piece of information we ever wanted? How has that impacted curiosity?
So right now, if you have a phone or a computer, everybody has the same answer, right? So it used to be, high intellect, those would go research, would come up with answers, so to speak. So now the playing field is equal. But what makes a difference is in terms of how do you take what the answer is and begin to build on it and say, all right, this is the answer, but how do we expand our thinking? How do we connect our products? How do we connect our services in light of what we're having all the answers? And the competitive edge will be those that are most curious.
It almost goes back to the joke with the Italian gentleman of,
Yes.
what do you get when you ask an American a question? An answer.
Yes. 100%. One of the things that I encourage leaders when they begin to think about how to create a culture of curiosity is, I said, when you are leading a meeting or a one-on-one and somebody asks you a question, the best thing you can say is, I don't know. Let's explore, right? Because you're showing vulnerability, like I'm the leader, but I don't have all the answers, but I would love to have a conversation about what's possible here. And that's when you begin to open up the connection you have with someone that, oh, they really are interested in my point of view. I was just on a call with a CEO right before I jumped on this call. and I'm getting ready to go work with her team in Boston. And she said, I want to have a conversation with my executive team that I want them to understand, like, being on the receiving end of curiosity is what's going to really fuel our growth. And what she means is that you're asking people their opinions. You're valuing when they're challenging the status quo. And that's where we come to that question of, what is it like to be with me? If I
Mhm.
like being with you because you like to explore, you listen to me, versus, I don't know, I just feel it's like a transactional conversation. Now, there are times we have to be transactional, especially if it's an emergency. If there's a fire in the building, I don't want to explore what exit I needs to go on. I want someone to tell me, you got to go out the front door and you got to go now. But this sense of, so goes the leader, so goes the organization. That's not new information, but it applies to curiosity. If you can create a culture of curiosity, undoubtedly, you're going to improve engagement. You're going to improve performance.
Yeah, and we used to talk in Humana about the shadow of a leader, which is really about the culture they're building. What are some of the things as a leader that I could be looking for to determine whether I'm creating this kind of curious an environment that supports curiosity?
Yeah. So the first thing you can do is, with your team, is set the intention, is to say, I want to create a culture amongst our team where people feel safe to ask questions and they feel safe to challenge the status quo. Now, you might not use those words, but you're saying, I want to start anew. And what a new looks like in terms of, let's really expand our thinking. And in order to expand our thinking, I need everybody to be participating. And I want you to know I'm on a path of listening and understanding what's best for the team, which then is best for the organization, if you will. So you got to set the intention so that they don't have like this whiplash, like, wait, yesterday they didn't listen to me and today they're going to listen to me. Is just set it out of, I'm growing, I'm learning as a leader, and here's what I would like us to think about. And then live into that. Live into it in meetings, when you're leaving space for discussion, or when you're encouraging people and you're rewarding people for asking questions. At the end of that meeting, you can say, how did we do in terms of listening to each other and expand our thinking? They'll tell you.
Yeah, and you mentioned this in the book that there you found, especially with women, that there was some likelihood to not ask questions. But I also noticed that, just working in corporations, that often it could be the shadow of the leader that stifles that. Any tips or guidance you would give to, you know, teammates on how to get more comfortable being curious? Or does it really roll up to, if the leader's not supportive, it's going to be really hard for you to break through that?
It's definitely challenging if the leader doesn't set the pace. It doesn't mean that you can't role play it. And I will tell you, this was probably the number one question I get privately. I love this. I want to do this, but my leader does not. And we do assessments. We can also determine if you're an outlier. So let's say an individual has a high level of curiosity, but they're working on a team that has low levels of curiosity, and you feel awkward, you feel out of place. That's most likely what it is. There's not a match. So a couple of things you can do is you can model it. You can approach your leader in a different way. Some leaders don't like to be challenged. Some leaders don't even like for you to ask them questions. If you approach it in a way of, hey, I want to do my best work here, and I'm wondering about X, Y, or Z, right? You're approaching it. I want to do my best work. I want to get the best performance, and I'm wondering about this. But having said all that, it still may not be enough. And you
Hmm.
might just need to find a team that matches your level of curiosity.
That's interesting, because some of the work I do I do it even with my athletes, is we talk a lot about core values, and most folks haven't spent the time to identify their core values and what's really important to them. And then they'll get into a job and something won't feel right. And when you go back and you say, well, that's because it was going against one of your core values. And it sounds like what you're saying is, if curiosity is one of your top values, and it's one of your most important things, then that's something you need to think about as you're looking at potential jobs or teams that you might join, is to take a pulse on, you know, is is curiosity supported here or not?
Yeah. And I had not thought of this, but I began to think about, when I think about curiosity, the value behind curiosity might be is could be belonging, right? So that value might be, I want to belong. I'm feeling belonging. But if somebody doesn't listen to me or they discount my conversations, I don't feel like I belong here. Right. But you sparked some thoughts in me. So I'm going to do a little bit more research on that. What is the value behind curiosity? Certainly it would be different for everybody, but there might be some similarities in terms of when people feel shut down when they're not a part of a conversation.
Yeah, yeah, and that's typically what you find is that irritation or anxiety you feel is that, I had all came up with all these great ideas and, people just poo-pooed them or discounted them. And so I don't feel a part of the team. And that was one of the things we always were measured on with the Gallo. I feel like part of a team.
Yes.
And so it often goes back to those values, whether curiosity is one of your values or it's something like belonging. That could certainly, if you're getting shut down, kind of trigger that feeling.
You can just see there's so much to unpack here.
One of the things I think I found interesting because it reflected about meetings I've been in the past. And there's this feeling of that not all questions are good. And so I'd love for you to, I think I don't want people to walk away thinking, well, I just have to ask more questions. Because in your book, and you mentioned this, and give examples of here's some kind of good questions, here's some that aren't. So go a little bit deeper into, you know, how questions can shut down or invite you in, and how should leaders think about creating that space for conversation and curiosity.
Yeah, so it's kind of can be a little thorny in the sense that we've probably all been in meetings with people that just want their voices to be heard. And they ask questions or make statements that's not even relevant to the discussion. And they're doing that because they think, well, I got to have a point of view. Those are the kind of conversations that you have a one-on-one with that individual and say, what's going on with this? It's disconnected from the conversation. And I've been in that environment. And I appreciate someone's willingness to speak up, but it's not connected to the work that we're doing. Now, having said that, those are rare, but they do happen. It's this whole piece about when somebody asks a question of a leader, it's your response determines how future questions will get asked. So you talked about the shadow of a leader, right? If that leader brushes over it or says that's not relevant or we've tried that before, then that just sets the whole tone of, all right, they're not interested in my opinion on this. They're not really interested in creating a culture of curiosity. So the leader has to be very mindful of the environment that they're setting. You get better as you do it, but in the beginning, you have to be very mindful. It's all right, they just asked a question. How do I want to respond to this? And the best way is like, what do other people think? Right? If you don't like, I'm curious what other people think about this. Let's have a conversation. Well, thank you for bringing it up. Let's have a conversation. How do other people feel about this? That's just the best way to get everybody connected in terms of my voice matters.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Uh, you also provide a story about your daughter and curiosity. And I'm curious as a parent, kind of pulling it out of the business context as a parent, what are the things you've done to kind of coach curiosity within your own kids?
Yeah, so my daughters are grown now with children of their own, but I do write about a couple of them in the book. And one of them is I'm learning from them. So when my daughter was 12 years old, she was playing in a national tennis tournament out of Atlanta, Georgia. And she was being coached by Ruth Lay, who had been a pro herself and then took many young women to Wimbledon and the big champion. So now she's in her 80s. She's just working at the local club, having a good time working with juniors. And so I don't know how it happened, but Megan got into the finals. So now she's playing Lindsay Burdett in the finals, her first national tournament. She's in the finals. And in junior tennis, you call your own shots, meaning that if the ball is out or in, you don't have an official, you're doing it yourself. So it's in Augusta, Florida. It's like 100 degrees and it's junior tennis. So these matches go on like a long time. So Megan wins the first set and Lindsay Burdett wins the next set. Right? Now they're exhausted. They've been playing like 2 hours in the heat. And when that happens, you get to come off the court and talk to your coach. You get to drink some water, you get to talk to your coach. So Megan, who's a 12-year-old, says, I can't win. She's cheating. She's cheating. And Ruth Lay says, well, tell me how she's cheating. She's like, she's calling balls in. I mean, that out are in. So she's saying they're out, but they're really in. And Ruth Lay says, well, don't hit them so close to the line. So she can't call them wrong. And Megan goes, well, you tell me to go for my shots every time. Go for my shots. Go for the lines. And Ruth Lay says, not today. And she had to change her game. So Megan goes back to the court and I look at Ruth Lay and I said, is Lindsay cheating? She goes, no. But at this moment, Megan wasn't going to hear it. So I had to share with her, find a way to win. And how you win is don't hit it so close to the lines. And Megan went on to win that. But I learned such a huge lesson of what, if you're doing something that's not working, do anything else. Try something new and different. And, in that moment, it was like asking a question of what can I do different? For Megan, she got her answer and she won the tournament.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. I mean, it kind of ties back to the Goldsmith quote. And especially, I mean, whether it's in our daily lives or whatever, that's where I find people get stuck. They meet that resistance and just leaning into this. Why I think curiosity is so important of what happens if I push through this? What's on the other side? Because working with that resistance is the point. I mean, if you go to something like lifting weights, when it gets hard, that's the point. It's supposed to be hard because on the other side is growth and progress. But often we give up because we're just not curious on what happens if I do go for this.
And it's for me, it's getting to the feeling level. So like I'm analytical, so I can talk myself into anything. But when I go to the heart level of how will this feel if I complete this set of this weight that I've not done before? I'm like, man, you're going to feel really good and you're probably going to look better. I always just go, how am I going to feel? And when I get to the feeling level is when I can have a breakthrough.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. There's some science around this concept of zooming in and zooming out. And like with triathletes, like when I did my first Ironman, I say Ironman is like the ultimate Buddhist experience because it teaches you to be here now. When you're swimming, you can't be thinking about the bike or the marathon. And when you're biking, the swim doesn't exist anymore. And the concept of zooming in and out is there's times where you need to zoom in on how am I feeling? How are the legs feeling? What's going on right this moment? And then you need to zoom out, which is when you're struggling, that's the time to zoom out and say, how's it going to feel when I finish this thing? What's it going to look like? What are the sounds? What are the emotions I'm going to go through when I cross that finish line and they say, Michael Seiler, you are an Ironman. And just being able to do that back and forth, whether it's when you're doing some focused work and you're getting frustrated, it's like zoom out. What's the goal? What's the finish line? And then zoom back in to get the work done. But you're right. I think it's that being able to get in touch with those feelings is so important.
It's often been said that when you're in the picture, you can't see the frame. So that point of zooming out and saying, all right, what would this look like, feel like? How will I feel about it?
I love that. I'm going to take that one away, probably reuse it. I'm not ashamed to say. Well, Debra, this has been amazing. If folks want to learn more about you, the book, where would you point them?
Yes. So you could go to my website, which is Debra, and that's Debra Clary, Clary, .com. So on my website, you'll be able to take the curiosity assessment if you're interested in what's your current level of curiosity. And then there's lots of articles and podcasts are also on there that you can learn.
Awesome. And you're also very active on LinkedIn. So for those of you who are out on LinkedIn, you can find Debra there as well. This has been great. I can't stress enough. This book really was amazing. I mean, it is a valuable resource for leaders, for individuals, for organizations. And I don't even know how many, I didn't count, but a third of the book feels like it's resources, other materials to learn more about the curiosity curve and just being more curious. So that's my shout out to go out, buy the book, and get your highlighters ready and take notes. So Deborah, thank you again. Any parting words before we sign off today?
Be curious.
I love it. Well, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
My pleasure. Thank you.